Well, last session we laid some foundations that there's more to this world than merely the material stuff, the stuff of physical things, but more that the account of human history is actually an account of being caught up in a massive spiritual conflict. And that kind of sounds weird to us, but the Bible's bringing a reality about that we as humans are part of something far larger. It's terrifying, it's extraordinary, it's powerful. It's almost the defining fact of our existence. It's almost the defining fact of our existence. That there are spiritual forces against God seeking to draw humanity away from God with them. I don't think you can properly can't properly make sense of humanity, our existence, without understanding this truth. And you can't understand the Bible's language actually without a sense of this language of kingdom. Kingdom. The rule of God. The rule of God over against. These things are deeply, deeply enmeshed in the biblical narrative as part of who we are. There is more, but there is a danger that as we begin to grasp this larger canvas, the danger we end up thinking about this spiritual reality and engage with it as pagans. So you get the warning from the previous session. So we need to get a heightened sense of this spiritual realm, but don't do it as pagans do it, which is where almost always Western churches end up, because Western churches are vulnerable, not having had deep roots back into the scriptures sufficiently to see its critique of paganism. So we almost always end there. And the pagan thing is to fail to grasp the absolute sovereignty of God over the spiritual realm, and to fail to grasp the absolute responsibility of humans who are influenced by the spiritual realm. But now I want to dig a bit further. How do we actually experience the battle? How do we experience the battle of demonic forces, spiritual forces against us? And how do we engage in it as individuals and churches? I'm going to talk sort of very large canvas for us now. Tonight, I'm going to really talk about the particulars of how Satan deals with each of us, how we tackle that together. So it's big there. But related to this is, how do we stop running churches that are naturalistic churches that are just book reading clubs? How do we step into engaging the supernatural as Christians, as churches? It's a key question. How do we step into the spiritual? Now, so often our ministries are no more than this worldly. We reduce our ministries down to mere words. They're debating clubs. They're public speaking things. Our chief aim is to get people to agree to a set of propositions, to change their behaviour. And all of that's very inadequate. It makes our churches very inadequate. But how do we get our ministries to truly engage in the supernatural? That's the big question that I want to wrestle with you now. Now, some are sure they've got the answers. I've got a couple of quotes up here. Some are sure they can tell us how to engage with the supernatural. Let's see if we can hit these. You have a choice to live in the natural or the supernatural. If you live in the supernatural, it's normal for you to see the power of God on display. So instead of saying, wow, we saw a miracle, you see it as normal. So there's someone who says the way to engage as a church in the supernatural is to actually appreciate that you'll get to a place where miracles just become normal. So engaging the supernatural for this person is about seeing miracles as normal, the power of God on display. Another person, I've got another quote for you here, says this: the realm of the spirit, the supernatural realm, angels and heavenly visitations, etc., are meant to be a normal part of your life, says this person. Most people are robbed because of religious mindsets. Now, this person says they minister deliverance from those mindsets so that you can receive all that God has for you. Now, what does God have for you? In their estimation, God has for you heavenly visitations, miracles, angels, supernatural is meant to be a normal part of your life. Are these answers right? They're very popular. I just got those from Google. So very easy to find this kind of stuff. Lots of books written along these lines. Now, what these express is a strong awareness of the supernatural, a very great awareness of a higher battle, which is good. And they're concerned that we engage with it, which is good. And they insist that if you do, though, you will see angels, demons, have visitations, miracles will be normal, the power of God will be on display. Now, there's a shape to their existence, to the way they conceive of existence that's being offered. I've attempted to draw it for you. Let's see if this works for you. They conceive of the supernatural realm up there, then they conceive of below that the natural realm, and there's a very strong line between those realms. So that we live in the natural, there's a supernatural over us, and what we've got to do is find a way to get into that supernatural and pull it down into our realm. That's the way they conceive the worldview they operate with. But here's the thing, they say you can live below the line, but you'll just be living in the natural. And if you want to live in the supernatural, you've got to get the techniques to get up. But here's what I'm saying. That conception of reality is itself a problem. It's a conception that's trying to rescue us from a problem, which is real. We're caught up in failing to appreciate the supernatural. So that they've identified a problem, but the solution they're offering is itself very inadequate. So to dig into that, let's take two steps. I'm going to take you into the spiritual realm again, but take you into the deeper problem, what's really going on in the spiritual realm, then how God most deeply engages with that problem. So it's quite a journey. You're up for this? We're going to do lots of Bible ripping into and get into the text, okay? Whether you are or not, let's just do it anyway. Okay. The deeper problem with the spiritual, come with me on a journey. Come and look at Matthew 16. Matthew 16. A familiar passage, but one with pieces you may not have noticed as much. Jesus has just, through conversation with them, they've come to terms with the fact that he is the Son of God. So verse 16, Peter answers, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus says, "You've got that right. It's been revealed to you by my Father in heaven." There, verse 17. Verse 21, he begins to explain that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things and be killed on the third day, raised to life. Verse 32, Peter takes him aside and begins to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turns and says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter didn't agree with the way Jesus was going to do his ministry, voices his disagreement. Jesus comes at him and says, "Get behind me, Satan." Imagine you dealing with your arguments like that. Try it at home. My wife wants to go on holidays in the Blue Mountains. I want to go to the beach. So you pull the Satan card. Kathy, get behind me, Satan. It's the beach for us. Do you mean why has Jesus pulled this card out? Is it just that he's overreacting? He's just that kind of emotional guy? Well, I'm going to start with an assumption, which I trust you will share, that he's not overreacting. So this therefore means that what's going on here is hugely serious. That Peter can be accused of being satanic at this point of some fashion means it's hugely. Let me clear some ground. Is Jesus suggesting that Peter at that moment was possessed by Satan? Like, did his facial expressions morph, and his head spun around and he vomited? Do you remember that whole movie? Is that what's going on here, that suddenly Peter's been possessed by a demon? No. The roots of this go way, way back in Matthew's Gospel, back to the temptation experiences. Come with me to chapter 4. Chapter 4. Remember instincts. Remember the danger of your instincts. Be ready to have your assumptions reshaped here. Chapter 4. Look at verse 8. "The devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendour. All of this I will give to you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." If you will bow down and worship me. Satan offers Jesus the kingdoms of the world. Now get this, there's no suggestion that Satan's wrong to offer them. Satan is called the ruler of this world in John 14. He's called the God of this age, 2 Corinthians chapter 4. So it doesn't seem it's wrong of him to offer the kingdoms of this world, because they seem to be his to be offered in some fashion. This was a temptation to Jesus in that it was offering Jesus a way to come into the rule, his kingly rule over the world, in a way that was different to the way his Father wanted him to go. So the purpose of God in his Son is that his Son might come into his kingdom, kingly rule, become the king of the nations, the world. And what Satan's offering is a way to that end point via a path that was different to the way the Father had chosen for him to go. What was the way that his Father had chosen him to come into his kingdom? Via the cross, via suffering, via crucifixion, via the humiliation of self-sacrifice. Now you fast forward to Peter with Jesus, Matthew 16. Jesus says he's going to go to the cross to come into his kingdom in submission to his Father's will. And Peter says, no, it will never be that the Lord, my Lord, should suffer like that. The Jew in Peter says the Messiah is never going to go through that experience. Now, do you see where those words came from? Do you see where Peter's words came from? Straight out of the mouth of Satan. It came from a way of thinking aligned with Satan's way of thinking. Peter was speaking the words Satan speaks, though it wasn't that he was possessed by Satan. Peter wants a triumphalistic ruler, one who would be seen by everyone as glorious and powerful and prestigious. You get this, don't you? And one of the things, typically in leadership, what people who are led want their leaders to be is the one who they aspire, they want to be proud of their leader, you know. And interestingly, just by the by, this is free, it's not in my notes, but in America, you know what, we live through our leaders, and so when they have church ministers, they want to make sure they're paid really well, they're the best paid person in the church. Why? Because they aspire to look like that, and they want their church to get its reputation for being this kind of church, and I'm part of that. In Australia, when we want leaders and we employ leaders to be ministers of the churches, how do we want them to be? Well, how we aspire to be. We want to believe that we're working class, low income people, so we make sure our ministers are all of that. But anyway, you aspire to your leader being the one you want to aspire to, so you set them up. Peter wants a leader. Peter wants a leader that he can be proud of. He wants the triumphal leader. He doesn't want a leader who's going to go to the cross, because that would be humiliating, do you see? Now, where do those words come from? Satan. If a human were left to themselves to work out how to win a crowd, if a human was left to themselves to work out how to grow a movement, win a kingdom, how would we by instinct do that? We'd do it by getting impressive people to lead us. We'd get it by people who have an outward display of impressiveness so that others will be impressed by them and be drawn to them by being clever or beautiful or big or intimidating. You wouldn't do it by getting weak people to lead you. You wouldn't get it by doing meek people to lead you. You wouldn't do it by having people who lead you meekly submitting to their enemies. You wouldn't have that. You wouldn't have them, the people leading you, suffer and die to establish a kingdom. Are you with me? You agreeing? Yeah. It's an instinct thing again. If you asked anyone to write the scriptures from our instinct, especially the instinct untouched by Christian culture, that's important to realise. If we were to write the scriptures untouched by Christian culture, we would never have come up with Jesus. We would have come up with what Peter wants Jesus to be. And the point of what Jesus was saying was that Peter was operating in Satan's power when he spoke the way that he did. He was speaking from a context and a place of one who was raised in a world ruled by Satan. He was speaking the way the world would speak, the fallen world, the world under the dominion of Satan, which it is. A world opposed to God and his way of doing things. Do you see what Jesus is saying? You don't actually have in mind the things of God, says Jesus to Peter. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of man. Get behind me, Satan. You have the things of man in mind. You are a person consumed and absorbed with the culture of the world that's under the sway of Satan. Is this connecting? So the point here is this: when you work out this stuff on your own, using your own instinct, when you do it according to what we instinctively feel is good, you come up with a way to win a kingdom that will always be by power and might and beauty and wit and success. Triumph. I want a church that's so big, it'll impress the world. That's how we come up with it. That is Satan's thinking. That's the world's thinking. The world's thinking that's ruled by Satan. And here's my main thesis, if you like, which I'm going to unpack for us. Behind the visible impact of Satan, the unsophisticated influence of Satan, behind the visible, unsophisticated influence of Satan in demon possession, which is largely akin to physical suffering, is a more sophisticated work of Satan in our world. A more subtle, a more hidden, a far more powerful, a far more serious, a far more insidious, a far more concerning work of Satan, a shaping of our values and our tastes and our views and our instincts. That is the scary work of Satan. Come and look at Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2. Verse 1. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sin, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Notice this. Outside of Christ, we all lived following Satan. How did we follow Satan? By being demon-possessed? No. By gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following the desires and thoughts. That's how you followed Satan. By following the ways of this world. That's how you live under the sway of Satan. This is massive. This is a far deeper and more profound work than possession. It's Satan's power to have us follow him in the ordinary and normal instincts and values of our lives. Possession seems scary, but it's not. Instinct says it's the scary thing. It's the real evidence of Satan. It's the power. That's what instinct says. But that's not a scrap on the horror of being trapped in the ways of the world. Being trapped in middle-class values. Being trapped in the culture of the northern beaches. Being trapped in leisure culture. Careerism. Familyolatry. These are all the work of Satan. And that is truly terrifying to be caught like that. And it even seems wrong to use that language. Satanic. Oh, because instinctively I think satanic is foreboding and dark and oppressive. No. It's love is love. It's freedom to do whatever I want. They don't seem dark and oppressive, do they? But they're satanic. Let me give you two illustrations of this from the Bible. Come with me to John 8. Come with me to John 8. So you've got a dispute here between Jesus and the Pharisees. Jesus makes the point that if you follow me, verse 31, you'll be my disciples, you'll know the truth will set you free. They say, we've never been slaves of anyone, which has got to be the dumbest statement ever made in history, hasn't it? The Jews have never been slaves of anyone. They've only ever been slaves of people. Anyway, but you've got that kind of weirdness. But they have this dispute. You come down to verse 44. You belong to your father, the devil. And you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to truth, for there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he's a liar and the father of lies. Now, you belong to your father, the devil. Have you ever used that pastorally? Wow, they are heavy words. Is he saying that they're possessed by Satan? No, he's saying something far more powerful, sinister and terrifying. See, Satan, verse 44, halfway through there, is a liar and the father of lies. In rejecting Jesus, who is, verse 45, speaking the truth, notice those connections there. Jesus, yet because I tell you the truth, you don't believe me. Jesus is the truth bringer. Satan is the father of lies. All right, you've got all this. So that they show themselves to be born under Satan by hating the truth, by not wanting the truth, by preferring the lie, that they've never been slaves of anyone. You see, there is a perfect coherence between the sinful heart and mind and what it wants and Satan's purposes, such that we are born under him and his opposition to God's mind, to the truth that's in God. We're born under him, loving and wanting to be people of lies. And so Romans chapter 1, we suppress the truth by our wickedness and sin, do you see? Which is complete coherence with Satan, who is the father of lies, who wants us to live with lies. Do you see how it all comes together like this? It really is quite terrifying when you think about it. Our nature chooses, agrees and confirms his opposition. We are willing slaves. And we're enslaved, here's a comment from Calvin, we're enslaved not by compulsion but by necessity. We are slaves not by compulsion, we're not made to be slaves, but we are by necessity slaves in our sin under the rule of Satan. He rules and we agree with his rule, and so we follow his rule, which is the deep and dark testimony of the Bible. But we need to work hard here to let the Bible shape our minds. See, what would intuition make us think that a follower of Satan looks like? Intuition would make us think that they'd dress in black, they'd have tats, they'd own snakes as pets. I don't know, you go through this kind of list, and they'd probably drink blood and kill kittens, and you open their fridge and it'd have all, that's the kind of thing you'd expect of a Satan worshipper, yeah? The people Jesus is talking to, get this, the people Jesus was talking to were the very children of Satan, but were none of those things. They were high-minded, they were moral, upright, Rotarians. No, I don't, but actually, dig into that. They were surf club members, serving the community on the weekends. Do you know what I'm saying? But part of the power of Satan is to shape our instincts so we fail to see that that's the case. We fail to look where we ought to look. We read satanic as a small dark thing and so miss the larger canvas, which is his very purpose. Do you see how terrible all of this is? Let me give you the second illustration, 2 Corinthians 11. Come to 2 Corinthians 11. This is a Paul, of course, this is a church. This is a church Paul founded. Some new leaders have come who are very spiritual. They've got very spectacular gifts, tongues and prophecy especially. They are, verse 5 of chapter 11, described as super apostles. That is, they're not just apostles, they're really over and above what apostles are. They're just amazing in their spiritual leadership. They're extraordinary. But you come to verse 13. For such people are false apostles, deceitful workers, masquerading as examples of Christ, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It's not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Wow. Do you see what he's just done? He's identified church leaders who have got lots of wonderful gifts of the Spirit functioning, who speak in prophecy, healings, bring life and vibrancy, who are successful. He says they're servants of Satan. Now that again just doesn't feel right to say that language because of our instincts. And verse 3 and 4 of chapter 11, you'll see it, that they're being deceived, led astray, because someone is coming to them preaching, verse 4, a Jesus other than the Jesus we preached. Now, it's interesting to dig into 1 and 2 Corinthians. What's the different Jesus these people are bringing? We are trained to think that the different Jesus you look out for is the one who believes that you're saved by works, not grace alone. There's very little evidence that that's the Jesus they're bringing. Very little evidence the problem is a failure to appreciate grace alone and not works. It seems rather the problem they're bringing is a Jesus who is triumphalistic. The Jesus not of the cross, but of glory. The Jesus of success, not of suffering. That's the Jesus they're bringing. which is a different Jesus, which makes them servants of Satan. It's the Jesus Peter wanted. It's the Jesus Peter wanted. You get the connections. The point here is 3 points. I don't know if we've got them up here, but the work of Satan is most deeply and profoundly in what we perceive to be ordinary things. And those ordinary things, ordinary activities of embracing worldly values, seeing power, prestige, privilege as success and the way to success. And third, this is part of a larger frame. Satan is at work in leading us to believe lies, that our way is best, our instincts and intuition is best. And so he leads us to either dismiss Jesus or reshape Jesus in our image. He is, do you remember John 8, the father of lies? When he lies, he speaks his native language, which is exactly what he did in the Garden of Eden. Did God really say? He's the father of lies. So you see those 3 principles. The work of Satan is in the ordinary. The ordinary is embracing worldly values and in believing lies. This explains something about Jesus' ministry. Once you start getting those things in place, this is my hope for you. Once you start getting these things in place, you'll see things in the Bible, you'll go, right? That's the sign we're onto something. Jesus, and let me try and start with you moving into battling, how you then battle in the spiritual realm. How do you battle? If there's the deep problem in the spiritual realm, which isn't demonic possession, it's like a toothache. Demonic possession is not the scary thing. The scary thing is being shaped to believe the lies of our instincts and our gut and our heart, worldly values, very ordinary things. That's the danger of Satan. How do you combat that real work of Satan? Come with me to Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1, the context is that Jesus has healed a lot of people. So, verse 32, that evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and no wonder. Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He drove out many demons. He wouldn't let them speak because they knew who he was. Very in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up and left to go and pray. Verse 36, Simon and his companions went to look for him. They found him and explained, everyone is looking for you, and no wonder. If you want a church to be popular, promise you can heal everyone's sickness. Everyone's looking for the guy. But look what Jesus says, verse 38. Let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages so that I can preach there also. That's why I've come. Now, be careful not to read through that and miss what's just said there. Jesus has got a whole raft of people, paralysed, sick, grieving, hurting, injured, and he walks away from them. How would you respond if you saw someone who could fix it all walk away? You're not acting like Jesus. Jesus? But look what he says. He does it, verse 38, so that I can preach there also. That's why I've come. Why? Because how do you combat the spiritual power of Satan, who is at work in our world powerfully by spreading lies? But by speaking the truth. Preaching the truth. That's why John 8:32, do you remember John 8:32, the passage you looked at earlier? The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. The truth combats directly the spiritual power of Satan to speak lies. Have a look at John 17. Let me see if I can find this verse. Someone find sanctify them in the truth. John 17. Someone can find that quickly for me. Verse 17. Verse 16. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. Verse 17. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. Sanctify them by the truth. Instinctively, I hear this and I find myself going, you're just doing a dodge. You're avoiding the supernatural, miraculous powers, angels and demons, and you're just turning us into book reading clubs again. No. That just shows how unspiritual we all are. It's Satan's ruse to cause us to lose the significance of the truth as a weapon in the spiritual realm. It's Satan's ruse to make us think that the truth is not what it actually is, a weapon in the spiritual realm. It's a weapon against the great and vast power of Satan. Let me push this some more. Sayings of Jesus and the New Testament, there are numbers of them about why Jesus came. You go through the New Testament, look for Jesus and his sayings about why he came. One of them was, John chapter 18, I came to testify to the truth. That's why Jesus came, he says. But there are others. Luke 19, I came to seek and save the lost. Came to seek and save the lost. Mark 10, I came to give my life as a ransom for many. John 12, I came to bring light. Now, it's possible to hear all of those and kind of go, wow, there's lots of different reasons Jesus came, isn't there? No. You pick up the thread. There's a thread. You need sometimes, if you pull the right thread, everything, well, this is a very negative. If you pull the right thread, everything comes unraveled. But sometimes if you pull the right thread, it comes together. You got that? It makes no sense, really, does it? But you get the point. You get this right thread. Dressmaker says that. Okay, 1 John 3. Do you remember what 1 John 3 verse 8 said? Jesus came to defeat the work of Satan. That's why he came. And Satan's great power is in the ordinary. Satan's great power is in the ordinary. Now, try to pull it all together. God's deepest engagement in the battle is dealing with the deepest problem of Satan. You run through John's Gospel and you'll see this. Let me try and fast track us. John has a heightened concern for the spiritual battle. If you read through John's Gospel, you'll see this. He talks about the spiritual dimension a lot, the spiritual warfare and so on. In his writings, he is very aware of the spiritual dimension. In the Gospel, Satan is referred to 3 times as the ruler of this world. Chapter 12, chapter 14, chapter 16. His work, or his potential work, is on view a number of times. It's often prominent. Jesus actually is even accused of being possessed by Satan. John 8 and John 10. And significantly, he's accused of being oppressed by Satan because he's accused of being a liar. Okay. John, in his letters, sees the world as being under the influence of the evil one, 1 John 5. John, who writes this gospel, is very aware of the spiritual realm, the demonic and Satan's power. I've just tried to prove that. Very aware of the spiritual realm. But he doesn't report any demonic possessions. The other Gospels do. John doesn't. He's totally aware of their activity because John's with Jesus when he does the exorcisms, the casting out of demons. So he's aware of it, but he doesn't report any of them in his Gospel. Doesn't mention them. There's only one exorcism that he mentions. Do you know where that is? John 12. Let me show you. It's only one exorcism. This is me now. I'm trying to pull it all together. Get the thread that pulls it all together. John 12. It's an extraordinary passage where verse 23, the Greeks have come. Verse 20, the Greeks have come. Verse 23, Jesus says, now the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified, the great hour of his glorification. And you get, as you go reading through here, that hour is the death of Jesus on the cross. So verse 24, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains a single seed, but if it dies, it produces many. So he's talking about his death. Verse 27, my soul is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it was this very hour I came. Father, glorify your name. I have glorified, and so on. Verse 30, you've got all of this testimony about the death of Jesus, how troubled he is. The voice comforts him. But look at verse 30, 31. This voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be cast out. And the word is actually used often for exorcism. There's the great exorcism. That's the only mention of casting out the demonic in John's Gospel. Do you see it? The great exorcism is the event of Jesus being lifted up on the cross, And when he is lifted up on the cross, he says, I will, verse 32, draw all people to myself. John, writing about the work of Jesus, sees this fact, the great event, the moment of battle, isn't healings, it isn't casting out of demons here and there, it's the casting out, the exorcism, when Satan is defeated and his power is taken away. And when people are drawn to Jesus like fleeing captives, out from under the power of Satan. Got the picture? And all of that happens with Jesus' death. How? How does Jesus' death cast out Satan, defeat his power, enable people to flee from under him back to God? How does that happen? Well, the passage that explains it is Hebrews chapter 2. Come to Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. Wow, you're tracking with me so far? You've all got that dazed look. You're all right? You're good. I'm feeling insecure. Hebrews chapter 2. Have a look at verse 14. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil. Satan holds the power of death, and free those who all their lives were held slavery by their fear of death. Okay? He frees those who have lived all their lives under captivity from their fear of death. By Jesus' death, he breaks the power of him who holds the power of death, Satan. Verse 17, for this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. That he might make atonement for the sins of people. How does Satan have his power? Well, how does Satan have the power of death? Think about that. How does Satan have the power of death? It isn't in making us sick. It isn't in making us blind and disabled. He doesn't make us be bound to sin even. The great power he is as a tempter and an accuser. As a tempter, he's named as the tempter in Matthew 4. By temptation, he draws us into sin, into rebellion to the rule of God. He makes rebellion to the rule of God look good. That's his job. He makes it look good. It's what he does best. Don't care what God thinks. By temptation, he draws us into sin. And then, get this, once we come in with him to sin, he accuses us before God that we've rebelled against God. He is the great accuser, Revelation 12, Zechariah 3. He accuses us of our rebellion before the holy God and so secures our righteous condemnation, death. He tempts us into it and then accuses us of it and secures by God's righteous judgments our death. How is that power destroyed? How is the power of temptation and accusation destroyed? How are his captives free from the power of death? By taking away his ability to condemn. By taking away his ability to condemn. We have sinned. We were tempted by Satan, not made by him by compulsion. He plays on what is in us, and I'm going to talk about that tonight. He plays on what is in us to bring us to that point. But now as sinners, he accuses us before the throne of God. You've got to condemn him, you've got to condemn her, because look what they've done. We are held by the power of death because of the sin and the law and God's righteousness that Satan plays on. He applies God's holiness. We are captives to death by his accusing work. How is his power taken away? When the validity of his accusations removed. When the validity of his accusations removed. Forgiveness frees you from the power of Satan. Done. Gone. It's beautiful. It's interesting in John 14 verse 30. John 14 verse 30, Jesus says that Satan has no hold over me. Now why does he say that? He says that because Jesus has nothing that Satan can accuse him of. He's got no hold over me. With the death and resurrection of Jesus, the price is paid, sin is atoned for, judgment of God is vented. There is nothing more for you or me to pay. No debts outstanding, no accusation that can be brought against us. We are free. Free from him who held us captive all our lives to death. Oh, do you feel it? The powerful spiritual battle happened in the life of Jesus. That the great battle was to stop Jesus going to the cross. Because as soon as he went to the cross, it was all done. So the great battle happened through the life of Jesus to stop him getting there. The fact that he went there defeated all our enemies. The fact that he died took all accusation away. Now, Colossians chapter 2, we want to make sure there's plenty of time for others. Colossians chapter 2, verse 20 to 21. It's in his death that we are made without blemish, free from accusation. See the language. Free from accusation. Colossians chapter 1, verse 13. He has qualified us to share, rescued us from and to the kingdom of his Son whom he loves, in whom we have forgiveness. So the connection of sin, accusation and death. Sin, tempted to sin, accused, death, makes us under the dominion of Satan. And so the great event of freeing us from the power of Satan, defeating him, was the act of achieving our forgiveness. The great act of defeating Satan and freeing us was the act of forgiveness. It frees us from condemnation. The act of forgiveness is the defeat of Satan. His hold over us is the temptation, is the accusation. When that's gone, his power is gone. So much more. Colossians chapter 2, verse 13 to 15, you can see that there. Now, we may not have gone into all the details, but the major theme is this. What I want to pick up with you now is the relationship of the cross to the legal and the spiritual. Do you remember remember the first session I talked to you about the problem? You can conceive of the problem of humans having a legal problem or a relational problem. I talked to you about that. So the legal problem is we've broken the law, we're under God's condemnation. The relational problem is we've offended God. You've got those two ways of conceiving it. Now, I want to add to those two problems the battle of spiritual kingdoms. There is a spiritual battle going on that a spiritual force needs to be defeated for us to be freed and enjoy God. Now, all three they're not alternatives. They're actually all of a piece. The spiritual battle that takes humans captive was by tempting them to betray God and break his law. So Satan, the spiritual battle that happened in the garden that happens over us was to tempt you to break God's law, break fellowship with God, and so betray him and become his enemies. Do you see? That's Satan's work to create the legal problem and the relational problem. The solution, the way you defeat the spiritual forces over us, is by paying the debt and restoring relationship. That defeats Satan. And so by the Spirit of God, we are united to Christ, our new King in the new kingdom, giving us new birth. That means there's now no more accusation that can be brought against us. There's no condemnation. We are now free from spiritual forces and powers because the debt has been paid and we are restored. Do you see how it all works beautifully together? And if I can just try and piece together the Jesus came to. He came to defeat the power of Satan. He came to preach, because by preaching the gospel, by coming to give his life as a ransom, by declaring the truth, you see, all of those things are the same way of saying the same thing. Do you see it in the end? Victory over Satan rests on the legal, relational truth. And victory over Satan flows out of the legal indebtedness that's been paid for by the substitute of Christ in our place. It flows out of that. That's why it's good that instinctively you land there. Okay. And it's the preaching of Acts. When you go through the preaching of Acts, it's dominated by the preaching of forgiveness in the lordship of Christ, who has defeated the spiritual powers. It's dominated by a preaching of the truth, the need to repent, find forgiveness in only the one who can, Jesus, return to him. Do you see how this all works together? Testify to the truth, give his life as a ransom, destroy the work of Satan. Because the way you and I gain the benefits of his substitutionary death that brings forgiveness is through the declaration of truth. That there is a Lord, that you've betrayed, There's a debt you've incurred. These are true things. And without believing the truth of those things, you'll never be saved. But there is a Lord who has paid the debt, defeated the accuser, made it so there's now no condemnation. And if you put your trust in him, you'll be saved. And you'll be able to flee out from under the work of Satan. It's the great gospel that is the great power. Now, this is no dodge. But aren't we back in that place where churches are just mere word churches? No. Not when the words are the words of the gospel truth. Not when the words are the words of God. That speaks of the King who has died to forgive us and remove the power of Satan to condemn us. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, says Paul, because it's the power of God. Our problem, brothers and sisters, is that we have the right weapons, we just don't know what we're using. We have the sword of the Spirit, and we think it's just a tiny cardboard club or something, when it is the sword of the Spirit. We don't handle the words of God like they need to be handled. We handle it as if it is just a book. We don't engage in the preaching ministries as if it's life and death, freeing people from Satan. We think it's just explaining syntax and grammar. We have bought into either a sub-spiritual, unspiritual mind or a paganism. And so we don't handle the Word of God with the awe and the care and the gravity and the confidence that we ought to handle it with. I love this. There was a good friend of Kathy and mine has been in our church for, 19 years or something, and she and her husband and her kids have grown up with our kids. But it was beautiful one Sunday. She came up to me and she said, I closed my eyes and I heard you preaching. And she said, all I saw in my mind was a flaming sword. Just the beautiful sword of God sweeping amongst us. And I thought, praise God for that insight. Because that's what's happening. That's what's happening. Do you come to church aware of that's what's going on? Are you aware when the Bible's read that you are hearing the very voice of God, the truth that sets you free, that sets prisoners free? Do you encourage your preachers to preach with that sense of things? The spiritual battle is taking place in the ordinary, in the embracing of lies, in condemnation and death that our world is captive to. And the great weapon we have, which can seem so ordinary as well, is mere words, the words of the gospel, which are not mere at all. We wage war not with the weapons of this world. Do you see? Let me just show you this picture again to see if we can finish. Throw up the supernatural. Yeah, thanks. So, friends, we've got this. Do you remember earlier I suggested there's a way people think we live in the natural and we need to get past that thing to get up into the supernatural? They're totally misunderstanding what's going on. The natural, ordinary things is, let me show you the rest of the picture. The natural, ordinary things is the supernatural stuff that's going on. And you're not cut off from the supernatural, you're living in it. It's just that Satan's blinded your eyes to see. That battle to put your kids into so many different sports and activities that they've got no time to grow, and that battle actually work out how your career plays out in your Christian life. That's the supernatural at work in your life. You've just been broken by lies to not notice and see it. I hope that's helpful for you. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, we do ask, please, that you might help us know the truth, recalibrate, see the world the way we ought, that we might see the supernatural in so many ordinary things, that you might please help us appreciate the weapons that we have that are so profound and powerful, that we might therefore use them as the very things they are, the word of your truth that brings life. We pray it in Jesus' name.